Right. English 242 friends. This is the last literary reading analysis screencast lesson. And it suffers because we don't have common book to talk about. Yeah, I mean, obviously we're in the situation we're in. If we had been together, we would have watched the film Children of Men together, and I really feel like that's a missing link between the rules of notice and the trying it out on your own in your final choice text. I mean, I think you're all really well prepared in your understanding of the genre of dystopian literature and a lot of the elements of that, and I'm sure you're going to be fine otherwise. But I realize now that the Children of Men movie that we all shared really did allow us to kind of like go deep in kind of more analytic strategies and to really talk about, you know, like because this is, it's a 200 level literature class, and so like symbol, like a lot of kids have questions, even English majors, they kind of generally understand how symbols work, but they've never really had any kind of really deep conversations about it. And if you're not an English major, you probably have even more questions. And there's a lot of symbolism in Children of Men. So I'm sad that we didn't get the chance to do that together because I think it would make your final paper easier. Although that being said, please know that I'm grading with a real understanding of what is going on. So don't let that bother you. But I'm disappointed because I feel like this part of the class is always one of my favorite parts, and Children of Men really locks it in. And we're not all reading that, as you know, coming on last week's lesson, there are 4 levels of rules of notice, even though it's just usually called rules of notice, which is the first level, the most basic level. And last week we talked about notice and signification. And today I'm going to talk about the last two, configuration and coherence. And Peter Rabinowitz, the person who kind of like formulated these rules, now he didn't make them up. He just kind of like looked at what readers do and gave them names. So this isn't something he was like, okay, this is how you should read, or this is the best way to read, or this is the best, analytic reading strategy. He looked at readers and said, what do they do with all different kinds of media? And this is what he came up with. So he was describing what he saw, not creating something out from scratch. So we're going to talk about configuration and coherence. So that maybe that will be helpful to you as you decide on your final project, your paper. So notice and signification, just to kind of sum up and review, notice has to come first. And it's going to be like very fine-grained, right? Like the rules of notice are these strategies that authors kind of use across media, across time period, to make readers pay attention to what they're doing and to say, hey, this is a big clue, or this is an important part here, please pay attention. So one reason why they're similar across many genres and medias and things is because once your brain has kind of like glommed on to the fact that those things matter, it's easy to transfer them into different media and things. So if you play a video game and something kind of faintly glimmers, you know because you've played other video games that you should go and check out that glimmer. Or if there's a locked door in a level, you know from playing other video games that there's probably a key somewhere, and that when you find a key, you're going to come back to that door and something pretty significant is going to be behind that door. So it's over time and over playing or experiencing or interacting with different media that you come to understand how the rules of notice work across different media. But in genres, they're very specific and tend to be kind of similar because of the affordances of those genres. So signification is also very specific because it's, if you say, I noticed this glimmery thing in this level, what could that possibly mean? Then they're very linked. Do you see what I mean? You notice something and you say, what could this creator want me to be doing with this? Well, how do they want me to value it? So those are kind of like very specific to text and very kind of like fine-grained and specific. Coherence and configuration, or configuration and coherence, are not going to be that particular. Like you're not going to be able to point to it in a sentence or point to it in a paragraph or point to it in a chapter. They're going to be more global in terms of the whole work and things that you start seeing getting set up by the work as a whole. So that's why sometimes when it comes to configuration, especially in my intro to literature class when I teach that, I don't even call it configuration. I just call them patterns. I just say, what patterns do you notice? Because really that's what configuration is out of those things that are the specific kind of like plot related, character related things that you notice, what patterns start to show up. And so you can see that that's not, you can't really point to a pattern because patterns have locations all over the place. They're more global. So the repetition is the thing that usually takes us to the next level of configuration. So yeah, so configuration means while reading, I think I see where this text is heading. I'm starting to put together patterns. I'm starting to predict things. I'm starting to kind of like have a sense of the text as a whole. And then after I'm done, that's when coherence is really the layer. I have lots of thoughts about how this text all fits together. I have a sense of how it worked out and what it all came to mean. So we're going to go into those a little bit more specifically. So this question is really at the heart of configuration. How will this text in all probability work out? So if you're in the middle of Children of Men, the movie, and our hero Theo has agreed to take on a quest and to do something for his former wife and the mother of his dead child, who he still probably loves. Even though the first part of the movie he's seen to be somebody who doesn't care about anything and is just skating by. When he takes that role and takes that quest, now we begin to predict, will he be successful? Will he win? Will he get his girl back? Will he, because experiences with other texts in the world start activating, right? So that's really, and that's the word there, activated by the text. It's activated by the text, but it's also activated by our experiences of other similar texts, right? So I was watching a new series on this weekend on PBS, and the very first scene, a dude's like on the beach looking, and somebody comes to his a beachfront house in Britain somewhere, and somebody comes to check his gas meter, and I immediately was like, I don't even know this man's name, but he's not making it out of this scene alive. And I was right. He got killed before the end of the scene. Now, it helped that the series of the PBS series that this show was part of was called Masterpiece Mystery. If it had not been Masterpiece Mystery, if it had just been a Masterpiece movie or series, I might not have thought that. But the fact that it was a Masterpiece Mystery made me know that nefarious and unexpected things were going to happen. And that's exactly what happened. So my prediction was activated by the text that I was watching, but also by my experiences with other texts. So there aren't that many rules of configuration. There are a few. For example, things like epigrams, titles, direct statements. If somebody says, this will not stand, well, that's actually a rule of undermining as well. That's number 3. There's certain kinds of statements that are made in movies and books that you immediately should make you look at the whole structure of the book. Number 2, something must happen. So that's definitely, I mean, things happen, they have reasons, they have roots and causes, they have consequences. We don't expect people to be unchanged. We expect characters to be changed. We expect characters to want things, that they act in such a way to get the things that they want. A lot of times they get blocked in the things that they want, and things will and must change. So that's kind of a very basic thing, but I think it bears reminding. Life doesn't work that way, but created texts do. And everything that's there is there because a creator decided to put them there. And so that doesn't mean every single thing is significant. You know, maybe you had a high school teacher who perseverated about the color blue. Maybe the author just liked blue. Or maybe the author wanted the character to like blue. Now that's a little bit more intentional, right? We had a book, there's a book that we read in my intro to literature class called The Yellow Birds. It's about the Iraq War, and both the main character and his kind of antagonist, who is a sergeant, both have blue eyes, and the author continually draws attention to the sergeant's blue eyes, and sometimes refers to the main character's blue eyes. So this would be what we might consider a pattern, right? Um, is the author trying to say something about people with blue eyes? Are they shifty or more innocent or something? Or is he trying to say that the two characters have more in common than it looks like? And even though one is the villain and one is not, um, maybe they have some commonalities? These are the kind of questions that you get to ask. All right, number 3, the rule of undermining. As soon as somebody says this must happen, we should question, will it? So that's when people make these absolute promises, like promises, right? Promises are important. If you promise something, that's opening up the rule of undermining. It doesn't mean that the promise will be undermined, but it just makes you ask, is this going to happen or is this not going to happen? The rule of focus. So this means that there's kind of like a frame or boundaries around the story, and the author will signal to us what they are. If this is only going to tell us stuff about the last 3 days, and then the next 3 days, then we'll see that and we'll understand that. And that helps us predict, right? If a novel goes back 3 generations or a movie goes back 3 generations, then all of a sudden we have a bigger focus and a bigger scope. But one thing that the rule of focus usually points out is that divergent plot points will be brought back together. Like they're there for a reason, and that should be made clear if we're really understanding this work. So genre, which we've talked about a little bit, is a part of all of the rules of notice, but particularly configuration, because when an author chooses a genre, and in the case of your final projects, even like a media form, right, like film versus TV versus print versus graphic novel, video game, there's always kind of these rules of configuration that we build up and that we activate when we experience those kinds of texts. And I had a whole screencast about this for a different class, but I'm not going to add it because we've got enough going on. But suffice to say that genre is kind of shapes our expectations and shapes what's possible to put in or not put in a creative work. And there are rules that are associated with it, and I referenced that a little bit in the rules of notice and signification. Signification, because like with mysteries, for example, or romance novels, right? Like you don't read a romance novel wondering if these two are going to make it to happily ever after. You know they are. Right? That's just part of the rule of the genre. Part of the rule of a mystery is that there's probably going to be an early misdirection, and that our main character, detective, or whoever is solving this mystery is not going to get on the first. They're not going to immediately decide who it is and then spend the whole novel or movie revealing it. They're going to have a misdirection. That's just part of what we know. But we know by the end, more than likely, it's going to be solved. Finally, moving on to coherence. So coherence is when we're done with our reading and we've been paying good attention to notice, signification, and configuration. And then we ask ourselves, all right, what is this whole thing doing as a whole? Like, what is its effect supposed to be? What was this creator after? So coherence means hangs together. And that means that the text itself, hopefully, is its own kind of full piece, and it suggests a kind of unity to the text as a whole. So I know, for example, right now a lot of people are playing Animal Crossing, the new Animal Crossing, and I'm glad they were able to get that or have it sent in with our quarantine that we have going on. But a lot of Animal Crossing doesn't have like a big coherence. It's like a peaceful, meditative kind of set of experiences where you kind of like wander around and do the kind of things you want to do. Other video games have like points to them, right? And even if they don't have big themes, they often do explore pretty subtle kinds of things. So there is coherence, not in every single kind of text, because some are just not built that way, but others are, and I would say most others are. My cat is now playing with the cord to my headphones. So the point of coherence is that those author's choices that we looked at in the other 3 layers are unifying. There's creating a unity so that they can point. Oh no, Henry, you're going to have to stop. They're going to point the reader to a set of possible themes or big ideas that this author wanted when they started writing or creating their work. So the basic rules, these are pretty obvious. It's supposed to make sense. Everything is there for a reason. Patterns have purposes, and the author has an intention that they want to share with you. So that last one, I'm sorry, is a little complicated when it comes to like broader English theory and things. Henry, you guys, I was almost to the end, and my cat muted my mic. And not knowing if it was totally muted or not, I just kept going for another 4 or 5 or 6 minutes, and it was totally muted. So, yeah, cats. I'm basically a mom. I'm basically a house mistress to cats right now, everybody. All right, let me finish this sucker up. Okay, so, sorry there was a big weird break. I'm trying to put it all in one video, but we'll see. So the basic rules of coherence, these are so basic that they should make some sense to you. It's supposed to make sense. Yep, the things that are in it are there for a reason. The patterns are there because they have a significance and a purpose, and that yes, the author either put them there on purpose or was working towards something that maybe he was in the grips of and didn't even know more broadly what was happening. And the last one is a little controversial, this idea that the author has an intention that they want to share with you. So in English, there is a fight over this question, right? Like there is, I guess, a kind of continuum of how welcome you find the authorial reading to be. So the authorial reading basically means roughly that it's an author's goal, it's a reader's goal to try to become the reader that the author expected, so that they can get closer to the author's intention for the text. That means you kind of have to impersonate a kind of reader that the author was imagining when you read. It's one of the reasons why sometimes reading is really hard, because you can't really impersonate the kind of reader that the author wanted, or you find them unpleasant or uncomfortable. There are certain writers, even as an English major, I read that I thought, I don't like the person this writer is trying to make me be as a reader. But on the flip side of that, and this is Rabinowitz's position, the author spent a great deal of time, or the creator spent a great deal of time trying to create something to say something to you. And it's churlish of us to not at least try to listen, or at least open our minds a little bit to, well, this is what I think they wanted to say. So Rabinowitz says we should care about authorial intention. This little chart, this is actually from a different screencast from another class, but it kind of illustrates a little bit of the problem that authorial intention is about. So if you think about it, whenever we read, there are 3 different distinct things that are involved in our reading, and those are the colored boxes that are on this picture. So the pink one, the text, that doesn't change. It's been written, it's been published, it's been put onto videotape, it's been put into the streaming world, it's a video game that you bought or stream or whatever. It's done. And the author comes into it in terms of what they put into the text, or the creator. Whatever they put into the text is the author's contribution, but it's going to reflect their concerns, their background knowledge, the time period they lived in. We talked about that, right, with Utopia, right? Like when we read a dystopian piece of literature, we're reading a critique of the time period that the author lived in. So Utopia is really about 1650, 17th century Britain. There we go. Even if it says interesting and different things to us in the 21st century, it's still from that century and it reflects that century, right? So that's where the author kind of comes in. That's the blue box. But then also there's the green box, and that's you. And that's the experience that you bring to the text when you read it. And so different elements of English or literature criticism focus on these 3 different boxes, and you see those at the very top. So new criticism focuses on the text, biological criticism or historical criticism focuses on the writer and the time period, and something called reader response criticism focuses on the reader and how a reader makes sense of the print. So if you focus on any one of those boxes, something changes in the way that you read. And Rabinowitz is very much a kind of a over here, like the overlap here. The author says wanted this to happen, so he made the text this way. He's not so interested in what happens with you, except that that's how he created the rules of notice at all, is that he watched what happened with readers. So how should you keep going? Well, as you continue to experience your text and read and view and watch and take good notes, then I would consider the patterns that you've identified, which would be configuration, and I would start asking myself questions like these. How do they connect? Which ones are strongest? What's the evidence of those strong connections? How might these lead to an initial idea or themes or big ideas or questions that I might write about? When you look at the patterns, are there any patterns in the text that contradict your initial idea, right? Like, is there anything in the text that goes, if I think this text is anti-utopian, then I'm going to have to account for X. And that seems to not be anti-utopian. So, for example, that might be a contradiction that you might want to take a look at. So you're going to be testing your initial ideas as you continue to read. If you feel like there is a tension between the ideas that connect and those that contradict, it's a pretty big thing for the author, the creator, to be like pointing to you. So do they resolve? Can you resolve them? Or is the tension maybe the point? Because sometimes an author is not going to resolve a tension. They just wanted to like create a conflict in you and let you solve it. Finally, here's a couple of rules of coherence after you're done with everything to go back and look. The ending of things, the ending of chapters, the ending of sections, the ending of the book itself are always have special power. So you definitely want to pay attention to what happens there. There's also something called the rule of balance. That means when you think about the early part of the book, the beginning of the book, how does the ending pay off the beginning of the book? Or how does it mirror? And then one rule called bundling. This is where we look for things that are similar or very close to similar or very close to alike across the text. The blue-eyed characters I was talking about in the other earlier part of the podcast was an example of bundling. And as you realize that these characters shared more than just their blue eyes, you start wondering, is the protagonist, does he have some bad evil in him? Did he make bad decisions like the villain did? And then you look at the ending and you go, okay, no, they had some commonalities, but there was some very big differences that matter to the end of the book. So the last thing that I want to chat with you about, and this is really about your paper, themes are not facts, right? So you can't assert this is the theme of something. Instead, you can only offer arguments about it. And so in a very real way, your final paper is an argument about your text and how it fits into a dystopian literature class and what readers of dystopia might like to think about if they read your paper or that they experienced the text that you've chosen. And that's really what you got to do. Literature means thinking about everything in the world. It means trying on other people's thoughts. It teases us into thoughts that maybe we wouldn't have if we weren't reading. But when we talk about what we experience when we read, we're making claims that we have to back up with data and evidence and reasons and all those kind of things. And so that's really what we're going to be talking about for the rest of our class together, is how we write about literature, how we read our own writing and reflect on it and make ourselves better writers and improve the drafts that we write. So that is the end. I hope it worked this time.